Today is Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Local officials attempt to explain why there was no flood warning system in place. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can always email us as well, right to our inbox, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We'd love to hear from you as we are getting through the news of the day each and every weekday, bright and early. And joining me today, CBN's Trey Goins-Phillips and Madison Seals. A lot to get to. On the focus story, Madison, some surprising numbers on how Americans support having religious chaplains available on campus.
Yeah, this topic of chaplains serving in schools seems to be less controversial for most Americans than other topics that we've discussed on here related to the role of religion in public schools. So we'll get into that poll today. All
right, looking forward to the details there coming up in just a few minutes. And on the main thing, from Satanist to saved, how one man's encounter with Jesus changed everything. That incredible story coming up on today's main thing. Make sure you subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts. We've got Newsmakers, Faith and Culture, Navigating Trump 2.0, Heaven Meets Earth. All great CBN News podcast offerings. Make sure you subscribe to each one of those. The links are there in the description of this podcast. Make sure you're checking those out. Appreciate that. All right, we are going to head to the news now in 90 seconds. And officials in Kerr County, Texas, rejected installing a flash flood alley warning system back in 2017 because they said it was too costly. A decision now under fire after 27 people and climbing, mostly children at a Christian summer camp, died in this catastrophic flooding. With an annual budget of $67 million, the county failed to secure a $1 million grant for sirens, gauges, and alerts that might have saved lives. Locals instead relied on word of mouth and old systems, despite repeated deadly floods over the years, and other towns installing modern alerts. One commissioner admits the plan, quote unquote, evaporated over budget fears, but now says a system could have helped a lot of people. And Elon Musk is saying he's going to launch something called the America Party, promising to break up what he calls one-party system that he says is wasting America's money and freedom. Musk says his new party will defend the Second Amendment, embrace Bitcoin, slash regulations, and champion free speech and advance tech. Critics warn it could split conservative votes and hand victories to Democrats, echoing Ross Perot's impact back in the 1990s. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. And of course, our continued prayers for everything going on with the floods. You can see we've got a lot of stories covering that from many different angles on cbnnews.com and faithwire.com. So make sure you're checking out those there to get the latest. Guys, wanted to get your perspective on this Elon Musk trying to launch another political party, and the critics there warning about it splitting these votes. I mean, that is essentially exactly how Bill Clinton got into office, was because Ross Perot came along and he sliced off a lot of that support from George Bush, and it ended up letting Bill Clinton walk into the office. And so at least in the short term, it's hard not to see this happening again. You have two power players like Elon Musk and President Trump, you got these two, the MAGA side of things and the Trump side of things. If you get this fracture there and it's split, it could be good news from the Democrats' perspective.
I think the argument for more than two political parties is a good one, but I think it's a long game. It's not something that you can expect to be successful in the short term at all. I mean, George Washington
just ask the Libertarian Party.
Right.
Anyway,
I mean,
I'm sorry. I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, George Washington warned about this being kind of our downfall, right? The two-party system being the downfall of our political success as a nation. And he was our first president. That was part of why he didn't subscribe to any sort of political party, was for that reason. So obviously, also, we didn't have the kind of political binary that we have these days. So the system just overall looked completely different, of course, when he was president. But yeah, I think that it's interesting, but I do think that Elon is going to be winning over people who are more conservative. He's not going to be winning over many Democrats. So what's it going to end up doing is splitting the conservatives in half. And, that'll end ultimately, similarly with Ross Perot and all the others, in the conservatives losing and the liberals winning.
Yeah. It's interesting because there was a lot of speculation with Elon kind of coming out and bashing the big, beautiful bill on social media. And then that kind of leading into him bashing Trump and kind of going beyond the bill itself. And a lot of political experts were pointing out, like, this is more than just about the bill. This is not where he's stopping. This is not the only reason that he's attacking it. And it's clear now that his plans to announce his own political party, that was part of all of this. And he did post on X, what the heck was the point of Doge if Trump's just going to increase the debt by $5 trillion? And I think that's what a lot of people were asking. That's always been a frustration with the government, is the big spending. And so I think he is hitting on something that a lot of Americans are really concerned about.
Yeah. And listen, if his ultimate aspiration was to be a president or some high ranking figure in the United States government, this was certainly an interesting way to go about it. You hitch your wagons to one of the two main political candidates. He obviously had the money to fund a significant amount of that. And then you get a bunch of supporters as a result. And then, because you see these people come in, like if Elon Musk would have just announced this on his own, zero chance he gets anywhere near the amount of support needed. But because he kind of latched himself on to the MAGA movement, he definitely is going to have a lot of people who are grateful to him for spending the money and for putting the time and the energy into getting Trump over the over the top on the most recent election. So interesting move by him for sure.
Yeah, and I think as far as the spending criticisms, I think as a conservative, they're fair, right? It's fair to say, the Republican Party, albeit smaller spenders, are still huge spenders.
Right,
and
it's still going up. The debt's going up.
Right. The debt is still going up. It's not changing. But you voted for a Republican in the vein of populism, right? A populist isn't going to want huge cuts. We're getting more spending. I don't think it's all negative, but I do for sure understand the criticisms about the increased spending on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and that's an important point that I think Vice President J.D. Vance has also echoed in support of the bill. Like, hey, we get it. This is a lot of money, and it'd be great to break this bill up into hundreds of smaller bills that don't seem so inflated. But if we did that, it would take years to get all this stuff passed. And these are things that you conservatives want passed. So yeah, there's an argument on both sides, but it will be interesting to see where Elon takes maybe some members of the party.
Certainly will be. And we'll be keeping an eye on that and reporting that on cbnnews.com and faithwire.com. All right, we are going to head over to the focus story now. And a new poll exploring American attitudes toward religion in the classroom has some interesting results. So, Madison, what's this poll reveal about the level of public support for allowing religious chaplains in public schools?
Well, we discussed on this podcast, I think it was last week, some other results from this same polling that was done by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research that looked at support for public school teachers leading prayer in a classroom. And this same study also looked at two other categories. One was a mandatory period during school for private prayer and religious reading. And the other was if religious chaplains providing support services should be allowed in public schools. So those were kind of the three different categories that U.S. adults were asked about. And we'll focus today on the second one because that one had the most support from adults who were polled. On average, 58%, or about 6 in 10 of those U.S. adults, including Protestants, Catholics, and non-religious people, believe that chaplains should be allowed in public schools. And even looking at just the non-religious affiliation bunch, 41% of them think chaplains should be allowed. So it's not the majority, but it's still a pretty large number of people who don't see an issue with religious chaplains in public schools. So those numbers are a little higher than the 4 in 10 who believe teachers should be allowed to lead a class in prayer. And we can get more into why that may be the case.
Yeah, that was going to be a question here is there more information on this poll as to far, like reasons given for people's support, whether they do support it or don't support it? Any more details on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's clearly a discrepancy in support for teachers leading prayer and chaplains offering support in services that could include prayer and often do. And it seems like the biggest reason for that is that meeting with a chaplain would be optional and actually more beneficial for students because chaplains could answer questions or offer spiritual guidance to students or faculty who are actually interested in pursuing it, meaning children might be more receptive to help or counsel if they're the ones reaching out instead of a teacher bringing it to them. But there's questions about what professional standards or ethics chaplains would be held to, and also what religious background they're affiliated with. That's an important point as well. And I think those would be important questions for even supporters of chaplains and something that they should be interested in too.
Is there precedent at all for chaplaincy in public schools in the U.S.?
Yeah, Texas became the first state to allow chaplains in public schools in 2023. And the measure was actually approved on the 1-year anniversary of the school shooting in Uvalde that killed 19 students and 2 teachers. And there was a reason for that timing because supporters of the bill pointed to the mental health crisis in our country, and specifically that's affecting young people. And they say that chaplains can help provide some critical counseling and addressing mental health issues that teachers and faculty just don't have the time to get to because that's not part of their job. And now more than a dozen states, including Florida, Indiana, and Utah, have considered legislation to allow spiritual chaplains in public schools. And Florida actually passed the legislation that requires parental consent for students to receive services from a chaplain, which parental consent is, again, an issue I think both sides of the polling should be advocating for in any case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the whole purpose of the original colonialists that came over here that pursued a new country and pursued religious freedom. It's because they didn't want to be forced to adhere to a certain religion. And so that's where this issue gets conflated so many times. But having the presence there is not against the Constitution. That's the thing. It's if you're forcing someone to adhere to a certain religion is what they were fleeing from, right? So at this point, it's like, man, just like you said, you get that consent going. I mean, that just makes it even more clear that it's not being forced. And it just seems like this is a no-brainer. And then the other side of that, too, is then once this goes in and the people like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they get mad about it. And then they say, well, we're going to have Satan chaplains in. And then they try to do this and say, well, you have to accept all views. But it's not that simple. But it's, common sense should be applied to that at the end of the day.
Stories like this are interesting because just because people are more open to chaplains in schools, I don't know that I think a lot of times we want to correlate it to Christianity, right? And I don't think that that's always the case, right? I think there's been several polls recently. I was just looking it up at Madison while you were going through that story. Like a Gallup poll from 2023 found that 82% of Americans have some type of spiritual belief system. And then a Barna survey from 2022 said that 74% of U.S. adults said that they want to grow spiritually. But all of these things are tied to spirituality. They weren't tied to, they want to grow closer to Jesus or they want to learn about the God of the Bible. So you have to be wary about that. But at the same time, I think people's openness to spirituality is an open door for Christians, right? It does give us the opportunity to say, hey, people are more open to spiritual things than they have been in the recent past. We have the opportunity to now have gospel-focused, Bible-based conversations about what does healthy spirituality actually look like. So I think it's a positive. It's just something that we have to be aware of. Just because somebody is open to spirituality does not mean that we're talking about the same God here.
Yeah. And then you have to be ready as a Christian. So if you're excited about chaplains being in there, maybe having a Christian chaplain in there, you have to realize if you're okay with that, then maybe there's going to be a possibility for other ones to be in there from other religions as well. And how do you respond to that and stay consistent? And so I think those are all things we have to be thinking about. Madison, final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think those are great points to make, considering the large number of Catholics and Protestants who voted absolutely yes, we would love to have chaplains in public schools. And I still think some of them could be saying that knowing I'm still going to find out what this chaplain's background is and what they're going to be talking to my children about. I think in Florida, having the parental consent as something that they have to sign on to is a very important aspect of this. So it's kind of like when you go to see your doctor, you want to know what their medical background is, because that's going to influence the types of things that they not try to convince you to do, but they try to help you through or recommend for you. And so I think it's the same thing here. It's ultimately up to parents to make sure that their kids are receiving the care that they need, whether it's from the school nurse or their teacher or a school chaplain.
Yeah, and I just want to point something out before we go here. One place you definitely can have the exact chaplain you want at school is if you're homeschooling. I'm just saying, as a homeschooling family here, hey, there's you don't have to worry about that. If the kids are right there under your own roof, you get mom, dad, chaplain all wrapped up into one. But I appreciate you bringing that story to the podcast today, Madison. Interesting stuff for sure. All right, we are going to head over to the main thing now. And Riaan Swiegelaar was a leader in the occult until one unexpected moment turned his entire life upside down. He told Billy Hallowell and Jen Lilly how a powerful encounter with Jesus pulled him out of the darkness and into the light. That conversation is today's main thing.
You said it wasn't a sermon, it wasn't a service or even deliverance that drew you. It was Jesus himself. And you had a direct encounter with him that changed everything for you. Can you kind of walk us through that moment and what specifically shifted your heart in those few minutes when you encountered Jesus?
Sure. So I think important to mention as well is that 10 days prior to my encounter with Christ, I met a person, a lady at a radio station who hugged me, who embraced me. And she literally snuck in like from the side and came and gave me a hug after I said on the radio station that I don't actually believe in Christ, and I don't believe that Jesus ever existed as a person or as the Son of God on this earth. I remember I specifically said something like Jesus is like an Easter bunny or Santa Claus. Those were my words. Yet still this lady came and she hugged me. And I only found out 1 or 2 days later that she's actually a Christian. So that, and I'll tell you why that's important. So that stuck with me quite a lot because I wasn't used to Christians actually showing me any love or acceptance or anything like that. So wow. Here I meet this Christian and completely unconditional, just loving, just embracing. So a few days after that, I was supposed to perform a ritual, a satanic ritual that was at that time decided around the world by 7 different satanic organizations to check in on whether the Antichrist has been born yet or not. So each satanic organization had to appoint a person to perform that ritual. So because of my background at the time, that was in the occult as a professional practitioner and somebody who actively practiced ritual even before I got involved in Satanism, they thought it a good idea to appoint me to do the ritual. So when I started preparing for the ritual, so there's 5 candles that you're supposed to light at points of a star when you do satanic rituals. This is like a standard thing. So when I got to lighting the second candle, the whole room where I was doing this suddenly lit up as if there was a spotlight shone into the room. So my initial thoughts actually was that I'm either being pranked or I'm being watched by someone. And as I turned around, he was there. Jesus was standing there. And again, I didn't know that this was Jesus. So I asked him, "Who are you?" And he said to me, "My name is Yeshua of Nazareth." And I said to him, "You'll have to prove it, because I don't I don't believe it.
Right. You're like, I don't even believe in you. I don't even believe you existed. Like, as a person.
But you knew he was a spirit. You knew he was obviously not a person. Or like, what was your thought in that moment?
Yes, I knew it wasn't a person, but also remember, in Satanism, there's a lot of involvement of invoking demons and working with demons. So demons always appear in a certain way to occultists and people practicing very light, actually, there's like a glow, lots of, bells and whistles, where there was nothing. There was no theatrics or anything. It was very simple, and that's why I asked him. So when I said to him, you'll have to prove it, he flooded me with so much love. And because of that lady at the radio station, I recognized that love, because you see, she had Christ inside her.
Yeah.
So I immediately recognized that, like, this is real. And I remember I actually fell to my knees because I couldn't stay standing up. And as it said, every knee shall bow. And it's definitely the truth. You can't contain yourself in that presence. And I don't remember whether this was like a minute or 2 minutes, but it was definitely not longer than that. But the whole world went quiet, and it was like somebody turned off the sound of the world, and I just sat on the floor in that quietness and that feeling of love. And at that time of my life, I actually thought I was happy. Like, if you would ask me that time, if you would ask me 3 years ago, are you happy? I would have said yes, because materially, I've got everything that I ever wanted, and I had all the drugs in the world, and I had motorbikes and cars, and I owned 2 homes at that time. So according to the world standard, I was definitely happy. I just didn't realize that I had a Christ-sized hole in my heart.
All right, Billy, thanks for that conversation there. Appreciate it. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We are looking at Ephesians 2:10 this morning. It says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them."
I love the word workmanship here and the word picture that gives us, that we are created by him with an identity rooted in him, and also for good works that he prepared in advance for us to do. That's our purpose in life.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I think when people are looking for their identity and they're struggling to find it, and what does God want from me? I love this verse for that reason too, because it clearly shows that whatever he's created, big or small, he's prepared something for us with a purpose. So you're not just some aimless creature floating in the wind with nothing to do. God has created specific works for you. They might not be the most famous in the world, but God made them for a specific purpose at a specific time. So all shows that you are valuable in your identity in Christ. So good spot to leave it on this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get yourself on over to news. Get yourself on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow.